Hey, friends, and welcome back to another episode of Thriving Thoughts. I'm your host, Dr. Sherri. Today, you are in for a treat. I have invited back my dear friend, Erin Harrigan, the Hustle with Heart coach, who was on the show in season 1 back in the fall of 2019. And I'm just honored that she's agreed to come back on the show and have this conversation with me and go to a very candid place of her own, of a time in which she felt alone. And my friends, this is for you. If you are in a place right now where you've made a choice, something that you know would better your life, and now you find that you're in some dark spaces, that you're feeling alone, that you're basically living and breathing and being offered the opportunity to thrive in the consequences of a choice that you're making, or maybe you're fearing a choice. Maybe you're fearing finally making that decision because you're afraid it's going to turn out messy. This is the episode for you. So, without delay, here's my conversation with my friend, Erin Harrigan, the Hustle with Heart coach. Erin Harrigan, welcome back to the show. It's so good to have you back for season 4.
Oh my gosh. I was just thinking about the last time that you and I, because, I was a guest on your podcast and you were a
Yeah.
guest on mine. And I feel like it was so long ago and so much has
Mhm.
changed for each of us, but also like we barely knew each other then. And now
I
you're
know.
totally my like
I know.
wisdom faith bestie. And I love you so much. So thanks for
I
having me.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And gosh, I'm trying to think, like, how long ago was that? Were you on season 1 of the show?
I feel
I
like it
honestly
was,
can't
you know
remember.
what? I was on your show. Hmm. I think it was the fall of 2019 because we then worked together
Yeah.
because you so amazingly stepped in to edit my book, and that was early 2020. So,
So it was before that, yeah. So it must have been in season 1
yeah,
then, because
yeah.
I didn't even launch the show until August of 2019. So
And I remember
yeah,
us talking about that when
yeah,
Jesse introduced us. So shout out to
yeah.
Jessie Kretzer for her
Yes.
making this connection.
Yes, absolutely. So, hey, my friend, this season we're talking about something that is significant to every person that I've ever known, every person that I've met at some point in their lives. And it's become quite the buzzword in 2020, with social isolation being the predominant force in most of our
Mhm.
lives. And that's the idea of being alone. And as you know, we don't seek to just wallow in our misery here on this show. We talk about how we use those alone spaces to grow, to thrive.
Mhm.
And so
Yeah.
I'm just going to ask you to be as candid as you'd like to be. What is something that you have felt alone in your life?
Yeah, I really thought about this as you and I talked before. And I could pick, something from my marriage or something from,
Hmm.
whenever.
Hmm.
But what kept coming up for me was a situation in business. So, let me unpack that. And
Yeah.
I don't know who will hear this, but I hope that it will bless someone who hears it, but it might make some other people uncomfortable. So in 2010, I started a network marketing business.
Okay.
And for the first time, I think in my career, I sort of had this tribe of people.
Hmm.
And sometimes, if you follow network marketing companies, they talk a lot about finding your tribe. And I love to do business and be with my tribe and my
Right.
community and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And there were so many times in the early days of that I felt that so strongly. Like I remember going to retreats and things and calling my husband just in tears, like, I'm so grateful that I found this opportunity and it's going
Mm.
to help me get out of corporate and whatever. So my
So,
business
like,
grew
this sense of
quickly.
belonging.
Belonging, total belonging.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, but so much, so much bigger than like friendship because you're sort of doing life and doing your dreams together,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because most of the time people get into a business like that because they have this huge why of what they want to change in their life.
Hmm.
And so it's like it's even I don't know, like you just become like a family
Yeah, for
and
sure.
the family that you choose,
Yeah.
versus the one you're born into sometimes.
Right.
So my business grew really, really fast, and I was
Hmm.
planning my exit strategy for corporate and got downsized, um, 2 years into my business. But I was like, this is great because now I'm just going to build this business. And interestingly, my business started to go backwards to the point that I lost a title, I lost a level.
Okay.
And as that was happening,
Well,
the
break this down for us for just a second, though, Erin. What was
yeah,
going on at the time? What were you changing? Had you changed your strategy? What had changed on your end when you, or if anything?
at that point, nothing had changed on my
Hmm.
end.
Hmm.
I was just doing, doing, doing. And because my
Yeah.
business seemed to start to slow and people were leaving my business, I just
Hmm.
put my head down and I kept going because that's what I do. And
Yeah.
that's really what it was lauded in the business. Like,
Hmm.
you just got to keep going and you just need to do more. And like, you're
Hmm.
doing the right things. You just need more of them. So
Right.
I was doing that. But as my business started to go backwards, which I know now in hindsight, God was really shifting me.
Yeah.
Um, it became very lonely. And the
Mm.
reason this sticks out to me is because suddenly, as my business started to go backwards, and I was like, like I'm doing this kind of motion because it was like I was struggling to hold on, like I was pulling,
Like
pulling, pulling, like
grasping at
uh,
straws. Yeah.
grasping at all of it and
Yeah.
grasping all the loose ends to say, if I just pull it in, if I just pull it in.
Yeah.
But as that started to unravel, and then I was approaching losing this prestigious, if you will, title,
Mm.
I wasn't I wasn't allowed to talk about it. Like, my my upline made it very clear that we don't talk about those things because those things are negative, and we and talk about thriving
Oh.
thoughts, right? Like, we don't have those negative conversations. We are only talking about positive, and you're going to get it back and you're just going to keep working. And it was
You know,
almost like at that moment, go ahead.
I just want to touch on that because that is something that people misconstrue about the world of thriving, right? Like it's this buzzword. I mean, you've got Thrive Cosmetics, you've got, you see it in pharmaceutical commercials, this woman running through the
Yep.
fields of whatever, and she's like thriving, right? And we think
Right.
that's all supposed to be positive. And those two are not
Right.
synonymous, right? Thriving is growth. Actually, I just texted somebody
Yeah.
this the other day, a coaching client yesterday. I texted him and I said, growth is like thriving is like ossification, with which, if you don't know what ossification is, if you've had a teenager, if you've
I
been a
don't.
teenager, it's where the bones literally start to break and kind of remold themselves. And it's referred to
Mm,
colloquially as growing pains, right? That's a process
yes.
of ossification where the bones literally are shifting and it causes a lot of pain, but the person is growing. That is
And
what
thriving.
thriving looks like. So go ahead.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I love that. No, I so love that because it's this sort of mantra of, like, we're just gonna replace a negative thought with a positive thought. That
Yeah.
you just
Yeah.
that's what you do. That's what
Right.
you do. So where the loneliness hit was when I lost that title and then I was not really, I felt allowed to talk about it, everything shut off. Now that was phase 1 of everything shutting off. And what I mean by that is I was suddenly, like, not included in some things, but included in
Mm.
other things. Um,
So like you were
I kept being
relegated to an
told
entire different status.
exactly,
Mm.
exactly.
Hmm.
So that's where the first sort of wave of that loneliness is. I think
Hmm.
where sort of the darkest aloneness is as God began to shift me. And what I mean by
Hmm.
that is, just before I lost my title, I had a desperate conversation with a mentor who said, hold on, stop.
Yeah.
You are wrapping your identity in all of this, and
Yeah.
you don't know who you are or whose you are.
Yeah.
And she began to talk to me about having a relationship with Jesus. And then
Mm.
I accepted Christ. That's not everybody's story. That's mine. And that began to shift how I looked at
Hmm.
business and how I showed up in business and how I did things in business. And this whole idea of this driving and doing more, God was like, no, no.
Yeah.
So then as I began to show up differently in my business, that's where the deepest, darkest loneliness happened because
Mm.
people didn't understand it. People didn't want me talking about God. People didn't want me training on
Yeah.
on events because I was not at that level, and I was speaking this language of, you know, sometimes God calls us to rest. In fact, it is a command. And
Mhm.
if we rest and
Mhm.
we surrender our business to Him, it switches from what I call, self-centered to God-centered, or,
Yeah.
this mantra of if it is to be, it's up to me. I see that as if it is to be, it's up to He. And that was very
Mhm.
uncomfortable for leadership. So suddenly I
Mhm.
wasn't included in any of that.
Yeah,
And
because it didn't fit the
even as I
narrative.
was going it didn't fit the narrative, and even as I
Yeah.
was going through the growing pains, growing in
Mhm.
a different way, it was very I was very, very alone.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that at the time it was the cancel culture that we have today, but if I
Mhm.
think about it now, it would felt and I don't know how people feel in that situation, but I feel like I was being shut out. I feel like so suddenly, right? I had this incredible tribe, and
Yeah.
suddenly it was almost like, no, you're not allowed to speak to that person. And if I think back, Sherry, I can remember people leaving the company that I was in and going to another company. And I remember us being told you need to block them on all social media because they will go take your clients. And that made sense to me. So that's what I did. But now that I think about it, I'm like, man, how lonely were those people to go from this incredible community to nothing
Yeah.
because they made a choice that was best for them.
It's exactly what cancel culture is. If you're not staying in line, right, with what we think you should be doing, with how we think you should be doing it, then you're a different status. You are of lower class, essentially.
Completely. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So it's funny when we talked about this and I was thinking like when was I really lonely? Like
Mhm.
that, it was this feeling of I left high school behind. Like I didn't need the
Yeah.
drama of the girl
Yeah.
drama of like you're
Yeah.
included, you're not included. But
Mhm.
but like at 40, however old I was, so that was 2016. So that was 5 years ago. So at 48,
Uh-huh.
suddenly this 5, 6 year community that I had been part of that had seen the worst of me and the best of me and loved me
Yeah.
through it. It was like, oh no, we can't love you through this. No,
Wow.
you're on your own. Nobody said that. I want to be clear. Nobody said that, but
Yeah.
that's what it felt
But
like.
that's legitimate, and that's why we're talking about this, because somebody on the outside might not understand, like, why would you especially if, and maybe you can let us in a little bit to the specifics of this, kind of MLM, I guess that's what it's called, multi-level marketing culture, right? Because you are not the first person I've talked to that felt like they were canceled and stabbed
Yeah.
in the back even by people
Yeah.
that were supposed, you go back to what you were talking about. I went to these conferences and I was excited and I was like, "Oh, I belong and I'm part of the club and like this is a place for me." And then suddenly you weren't. You were ostracized.
You're not. Right. And I do want to be clear because I hear it a lot in the circles I'm in as well. First and foremost, that I think that MLM gets a bad rap.
Yes,
Just like I think anything gets a bad rap because there are human beings involved in it, right?
that's right.
So
Yeah,
I
that's right.
think that I don't think that that's true everywhere. In
Mhm.
fact, I know incredibly beautiful, thriving and growing through the pain, through the
Yeah,
good, through the bad organizations, both in
yeah,
my company, the company which I'm still in, but peripherally. I know incredible organizations and
yeah.
incredible love. So it's not everybody.
Mhm.
Um, but but it's there.
Yeah,
And for those who are on the other side who may be listening and they're like, "Oh, you're giving MLM a bad rap." I just want you to step back and think,
yeah.
have I said these things or have I acted this way or have I chastised
Mm.
someone? The next level of that is we made the decision um to go for me to go back to work,
Mhm.
and I was terrified to tell anybody that because I thought, well, now people are going to think I'm a fraud, right? Because this thing that I've been telling everybody about doesn't really work. And
Mm.
B, all of these people in this tribe who had already just moved on from me would be like, "Oh,
Right,
she decided to go back to work."
right.
And the reason I know Like, that's
Yeah.
not just me making it up. It's because I had conversations with people in my organization when people that I knew chose to leave and, go on
Mhm.
and do
Mhm.
some other business. Like, that MLM was a stepping stone for them where we said, "Oh, well, they just didn't want it bad enough. They weren't willing to
Right.
work it. They weren't willing to
Right.
face their stuff. They wouldn't get out of their own way." So I was like, "I physically cannot tell these people this because I will be so chastised."
And so, did you ever tell anybody? Were you chastised?
Oh, yeah. I mean, was I chastised? I don't know. I mean, nobody ever said that to my face. I remember reaching back out to the mentor who through whom I came to Christ, and I had like a 5-minute conversation with her, and she said,
Mhm.
"Stop. Are you trying to tell me that you got a job? Like, is that what you're trying to tell me? Because I feel like you're trying to tell me, but you don't want to say it out
Yeah.
loud." And she said,
Yeah.
"Erin, this is your life. Take care of your family. Like, why are
Yeah.
you afraid to say that out loud?" And I didn't even realize that I was doing it to that extent.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, a couple of things, questions that are coming up for me. One is it's really fascinating to me, this duality of thought, not even a duality of thought, a singularity of thought, but saying something different. So, I think in a lot of these MLMs, I would guess that most are comprised of women, mostly women. I know there are some, that are more specific with men, but I know it's a big deal. And I know that people feel that sense of community, they feel that sense of belonging, and I know that most of them espouse the belief that women must support women. Women must encourage women, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's this idea that women many women, not all, have dealt with for years of the imposter syndrome, of who are you to do
For
this,
sure.
right? And so
Yes.
and so we come into this group, we come into this space where we have this belonging and they're going, who are you, like Marianne Williamson, who are you not to do this? Who are you to play small, right? Like
Right. Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
you can,
Yeah.
as long as you stay in line. And
Yes.
here's this leads into the second part, and then I just want you to take it away. But the second part of that is this shift happened on the heels or simultaneously as you making a life altering, bettering, eternally impactful decision for yourself. And you would
Mhm.
think when you make a decision like that, oh, like, oh man, this is the best thing ever. My life should reflect that. So I think there's also that, becoming a new believer, that
Mhm.
having this kind of maybe alone space with this is what life's supposed to be like after I make that decision. So just those two things,
Yes.
women supporting women and then, becoming a believer and then wham, right.
Right. And I love that point that you just made because so I'm an achiever.
Uh-huh.
For those who know the Enneagram sort of personality quiz or what have you, I'm an Enneagram 3. So achievement
Okay.
is very important to me.
Okay.
And making an impact is very important to me, and being organized and check it off. So when I accepted Christ in October 2014, I was like, oh, that's it. That's the magic like step. Like,
Right.
there's the secret sauce. I've done it.
There's the
And
secret to life. Yeah.
and I
Which
and
yeah.
I knocked out my headset, and I thought, "This is I got it." But then things didn't change. Like, it seemed to get a
Yeah.
little darker and
Yeah,
darker
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
darker. And the 2 things that happened that came up for me was, one is now I know sanctification and the transformation, you know, it doesn't always like, it doesn't just happen like that,
Mhm,
you know?
mhm,
God there was so much that God needed to peel away to get
mhm.
to me being fully surrendered. And I called my mentor and I was like, "Hey, listen, okay, I did this, I did this, I did this." And she said, like, this isn't a checklist. This is a
Right.
relationship with your creator who
Right.
knows, who knit you in your womb,
Yeah.
who, made you for work, predestined for certain things, and
Yeah.
who knows every hair on your head, who owns a
Mhm.
cattle on 1,000 hills. Like,
Mhm.
this isn't a checklist,
Right.
right?
Right.
So, yeah, and the women supporting women is quite a fascinating, there's 2 pieces of that. It's so fascinating that this sort of underlying, if I dare say, bully culture
Yeah.
exists,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and that we are so quick to judge what anybody's choice is in their
Yes.
life. I spent a lot of time early on, like, poo-pooing the corporate life, which I still am not a fan of the corporate life, but I was like,
Mhm.
"Ugh, you need to get out of that." Well, but some people might love that. But
Yeah.
I was saying things that probably made people feel less than, and,
Yeah. Right.
unworthy, because they were choosing to work. And I've heard other people say it. In fact, there's a leader I know who said, so she was full-time, she went part-time, she left her job, and then last year she went back,
Uh-huh.
and there's so many reasons why she went back that she tells, like, but who cares?
Who cares? Why do I have to excuse that
She
to
feels like
you
she has
or
to
anyone?
justify it.
Yeah. Right.
Exactly. So,
Yeah. So
yeah.
you were alone in your choice. And what I think is really powerful about that is it's so true. When we make choices based upon the convictions of our heart, of our, you know, look, let's just break this down a little bit. If you're having trouble sleeping at night, if you feel like something isn't right in your life, it's because you know there's a decision that you need to make, but you haven't made it yet. And I
Right.
think one of the fears is when I do that, everything's going to change. And I don't know how it's going to change, but it's going to change. Right.
Yeah.
And to be alone in the consequence of your choice, even if you know it's the best decision for you, that's what I hear you
Mhm.
saying is that you found yourself alone in the consequences of a choice and not even the consequences of a bad for you choice, in the consequences of a great for you choice.
Yes. Yes. And it, to me, it speaks to this whole idea that as we make choices for ourselves, or we start to go in a direction, they talk about this a lot in MLM and other, like, sort of personal development. It's like when you
Mhm.
start to go this way, or when you start to be true to yourself, for me, when you
Yes.
start to be true to God's path,
Yeah.
people are going to fall off because
Yes.
they either are very uncomfortable because you're
Yeah.
no longer in that box that they put you
Mhm.
in, or
Mhm.
that you allowed yourself to be in, and it brings up for them, it shines a light on things in themselves
Yeah.
that they're not comfortable with.
Oh, yeah.
And that's true of any choice, any
Mhm.
decision that we
Mhm.
make,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And and in the aftermath of that loneliness, I can look back probably over the last 4 years and see where I've, like, tried to go back in, but it's
Mhm.
not right, and I step out, and I try to go
Yeah.
back in, but
Yeah.
it's not right, and I step out. And it's interesting in this pandemic, I think that this pandemic brought a lot of things to the surface for a lot of people, and we've
Mhm.
gotten to see how people we know and love, how they show up. And so
Mhm.
I had the incredible opportunity to witness some interactions and some behavior that finally allowed me to break that off.
T
And I
tell
could
tell
stand
us
back and
more.
go, um, I witnessed some behavior, some reactions, some
Okay.
interactions, not necessarily around, the pandemic or racial injustice or those things, but just in the midst of all of that, that made me go, huh, I didn't know that was somebody's thought. I didn't
Okay.
know that they felt that way. I didn't
Mhm.
know that they would show up this way. And
Mhm.
I don't agree with that.
Okay.
I love them,
Mhm.
but I don't agree with it. So I'm going to extract myself
Yeah.
and let that relationship be what it is, and
Yeah.
move on. And
Yeah.
I never had done that before, because before I was still sort of holding on to this tethering. And so
Oh,
it's
that's good.
interesting. My word for 20 Yeah, my word for 2021 is unleash. So now I can look at it and go, I unleashed myself from
Mhm.
holding those where I was anchored or where I kept coming back to because I so badly wanted to be part of that. And now
Mhm.
I'm like, "Oh no,
Yeah.
that doesn't meld with my values,
Yeah.
so I'm gonna step out of this."
Yeah. Well, and I think too that we, certainly, one of the reasons that we get decision delay or decision fatigue is because we're afraid of the mess the decision is gonna make. We don't know what the mess is that's gonna happen,
Right.
and here's the beautiful thing, and I wanna ask you this. So when you make a decision, there's always consequences. People think of consequences as bad things, but consequences is just what happens after you do something. That's it. It could be a great
Exactly. Yeah.
consequence or a bad consequence, right? So consequences get a bad rep too. And people try to cancel them in their lives all the time, right? Like, I don't wanna have consequences. So they don't
That's
move
right.
forward, they don't grow, they don't thrive, they don't go through that painful experience. So, what was your journey when you found yourself in this alone space? And maybe you didn't even realize that until years after that that's kind of where you were. But what was your journey from kind of tiptoeing around the alone spaces and not really naming it, calling it for what it was, and then learning that, oh, I was feeling alone. I was feeling abandoned. I was feeling accused. I was feeling, cast outside of the city gates, whatever it is you were feeling, rejected. Um, then being able to not tiptoe around that, but embrace it and use it to learn about
Mhm,
yourself. So what
mhm.
was your journey there?
Yeah, I think it took a while, because I feel like I wallowed in this dark loneliness
Mhm.
for probably a good 4 years. Like, if I'm being honest,
Mm.
it probably was a good 4 years. So it probably began in 2015 and then really ramped up,
Wow.
2016, 2017.
Mhm.
Um, and there there were things happening in my life, like a financial crisis that my
Mhm.
husband and I were going through, or getting ready for my kids to my youngest to graduate and go away to college and whatever, that
Mhm.
I suddenly didn't have these friendships that I thought I had that I
Mhm.
could go to,
Yeah.
that were my, like, steadfast,
Yeah.
ride or die. They, like, rode off. So I think it took me probably honestly, I think it took me until 2019 and starting to go into 2020, and even until recently, to
Mhm.
really embrace, like, "Oh, that's what was happening." So I think in the midst of it, there was a lot of me questioning, like, but how do I change this? How do I take charge of this? How do I make it
Yeah.
different? How do I
How do I make
reinvigorate
it
these
more
friendships? How do I
comfortable? Yeah.
more comfortable for me and
Mhm.
and for them,
Yes.
and how do I
Yes.
help them know, like, I still love you and whatever.
Right.
There was a lot of that, but I feel like in 2019 where it started to come together for me. So in 2019 I started my Hustle with Heart brand, coaching, podcast, etc., to help women do what I did, which is bridge faith and business and make God their business partner.
Yeah.
Um but it wasn't until I started to talk about it and to write about it, and
Yeah.
I started to, start to build my book and that kind of thing. For me, writing is a I didn't know that writing was a big thing for me, but writing is a big way where I get all of that out.
Okay.
It really wasn't until then that I started to write
Mm.
about it and ask the Lord, like,
Yeah.
show me, like, why,
Mm.
and what kept coming up for me was, you're not alone.
Yeah.
Now my
Right.
family walked this out with me and they know, and so I have my family, but still was different.
Mhm.
Um but what kept coming up when I would journal about it and pray over it is God would say, "You're not alone. Like,
Yeah.
I'm here.
Mhm.
I'm here. I'm
Mhm.
here. Anchor
Mhm.
to me, anchor to me, anchor to
Right.
me." And I think that's where I began to learn, as I was building my relationship with the
Mhm.
Lord and checking the box to say, "Yep, I got that. I got that. Oh yeah, I do that every day."
Right.
That he started to peel back further. And
Yeah.
as he peeled back more layers, I began to learn, like, "Oh wow, I really hadn't gotten over that. Or, oh, wow, I do really still feel lonely about
Yeah.
that. What is that about? So I think to me, that's really been the journey. And honestly, it wasn't until yesterday when you and I talked about this topic that I was trying to think like what was really the loneliest. That was it.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
this is the loneliest. And listen, I'm the oldest of 4 kids, single mom, like, there were certainly lonely times when I was a kid, for sure.
Yeah.
And there were certainly, times in college or whatever,
Yeah.
but nothing impacted me, I think, as
Mhm.
significantly as that loneliness right
Now,
there.
yeah, and thank you for being so candid and sharing your heart with us because I know that it's resonating with people listening and watching. And here's what I want to ask you. How did you grow from the place of, when we lose relationships, when relationships change, we, being egotistical, self-centered creatures, typically make that about us, right? And not in a good way,
Always.
right? Not in a good way where
Right.
we're like, "Oh my gosh, nobody likes me, everybody hates me, I'm gonna go eat worms," right? Like
Worms.
that's right,
Right.
right. So I think like how long for you, how did you learn to go from, oh my gosh, like, am I just a pariah? Is there something wrong with me? Like, if I was just different, then this wouldn't be this way, to what they're doing has nothing to do with me. How did you make that shift?
Hmm. Um, I think I made that shift definitely through prayer and
Mm,
journaling. I
mhm,
made that shift talking with, interestingly, a few really close friends who are faith sisters, very strong in their relationship with Christ, who are in the same business,
mhm, mhm.
not in the same organization, but in the same business, um, who helped me see like this isn't you, you know,
Okay. Yeah.
and helped me understand that like, when God calls you a different direction, you
Mhm.
go. Like,
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
you're truly surrendered, right, to
Yeah.
his purpose for you. So I think it took a lot of face down on the floor, crying on my carpet, moments, face down before the Lord. Um, I think and I think it took some very key conversations
Yeah.
in some key relationships that I don't know if I would have had as those deep
Mhm.
relationships if I had kept going the route that I was going in part of that
Yeah.
tribe because I would never have let those relationships in.
Okay. So that leads right into my next question, which is what did thriving is all about growing and learning, prospering, flourishing like a beautiful flower. So what did you, beautiful flower, learn about yourself from this alone space?
Mhm. Number 1, I learned I'm never really alone,
Mm,
and that
mhm,
the
mhm,
most powerful relationship I have is with Christ, and therefore, like, the power of that outweighs everything. So,
mm,
I learned that I'm never alone. The second thing that I learned is, our purpose is to love,
yeah,
and so I learned, how do I step back and just love? In fact,
mhm,
I have a sign on my wall I'm looking at now, it says, "Just love." Like, how do I love those people that I
mhm,
feel like, you know, left me behind? How do I love those um, and ask forgiveness from those
yeah,
that perhaps I made feel that way? Like,
mhm,
how do I just show up in love?
mm,
And learning that, I am just as guilty of some of those things. Like,
yeah,
I don't
that's
have a
right.
place to judge, right?
Yeah,
Um, and I would say the other thing that I learned is, um, I like change does not bother me,
okay.
but I like to have all my ducks in a row. And sometimes not only
Right,
are they not in a row, like they're not
right,
even ducks, right?
right. Yeah,
So I learned that to fully live this precious life that God has
yeah,
given us,
yeah,
it's not going to be the way it looks on paper. Like I
yeah,
have to allow for that change and I have to feel it. I have to allow myself. I just did a video the other day to feel the burn.
mhm.
Not I'm not talking about Bernie Sanders. Or Bernie, right? Is that right?
Bernie,
Is that
yeah,
right? Did I get that?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
And I don't
'Cause
even
then
know
what I
how he
thought of was,
made
like,
it into this conversation, but I can now picture him with his
because
little
when I
mittens.
think "Feel the Burn," I think that was, like, his logo or something, his tagline, "Feel the Burn." But what I
Oh,
realize is that it's never gonna be perfect, and it's not supposed to be,
yeah.
and I have to allow myself to feel the feelings, to
Yeah.
feel the hurt, to
Yeah.
feel the loneliness, to
Yeah.
feel the ugliness of it,
Yeah.
because in that feeling the hurt and allowing that
Yeah.
emotion, the healing begins.
The thriving happens. Yes.
And the thriving happens because it's just like this. You're in that darkness. Think of yourself as the seed planted. Well, you don't plant a seed and then the next day necessarily it blooms, right? Like if
Right.
you're in this darkness, I've seen this written somewhere like if you feel like you're in the darkness, perhaps God has planted you.
Mhm.
Be,
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah.
um so to allow myself to be planted and
Mhm.
embrace it so that I
Yeah.
can heal through it. And I literally just that happened that idea just came up for me the other day.
Mm.
So that's how long it's been.
Ri Right, no, and thank you for your honesty. I'm a slow learner myself, but, I'm just now actually, learning from it's interesting, feeling the burn, leaning into the feelings. I did a video the day before you did a video called "Feel the Burn," but it was feeling the burn of changing your thoughts and how when that happens, you're gonna feel like it doesn't work and, like, stay with it, like, don't back out of it,
Right,
right?
right.
Well, so anyway, I just love how, like, on the same page we are and we don't even talk
Always.
about that kinda
I
stuff.
love it.
Um, and now I forgot
I
where I
love that.
was going with that. How do I do that? Just poof, it's
How what did I
gone.
learn? You
Yeah,
asked me that. What did I learn about myself in that?
yeah, yeah.
I
Um,
don't know what your other question.
I don't know. I don't know. It must not have been that important. It was important. It was about, um how did you take that I'm gonna, like, kick myself now, but that's okay. How did you take what you've learned, and you're still learning, and how has that
Yeah.
changed you, and how has that changed how you do business? And then you can segue into what you do and tell us what you do.
Yeah, I think it actually for me goes beyond business. So, um,
Okay, good.
every year I do one word
Mhm.
and pray and pray and pray over it. And this year, you when you walk through the one word process, it has you ask, "What do you need?" I don't know, it's 3 questions.
Okay.
What do you need? What do you want to be different? Whatever. And what came up for me was not that there isn't anything I need, but I wanna let go and let life, right?
Mhm,
Let go and let
mhm,
life happen.
mhm.
And what I realized is that not just in my business, but in the way that literally in the way that I nag my husband or the way that I
Mm,
wanna
mhm.
protect my adult daughters. My
Yeah,
daughters are very independent and they're very different, but I'm always like, "Oh, I want there to be peace." And
right.
then I and it in some things that I was reading about being the parent of adult children, like they got to learn. And how can they learn if we protect them? So, anyway, what
Mhm,
coming up for me was this idea of release, like releasing my control and releasing my handle on everything and
mhm.
releasing. And then in the shower, which is besides like walking or running, is where all of my Holy Spirit moments happen. He gave me the word unleash.
Okay.
And so what that means for me in this context is allowing myself to feel that hurt, allowing
Mhm,
myself to acknowledge it, allowing
mhm.
myself to acknowledge my part in it,
Yeah,
meaning
yeah.
I'm not responsible for them, but I
Mhm.
am responsible for being so tethered to
Yeah.
that tribe
Yeah,
that
yeah.
I allowed it to push me into such loneliness, not allowed
Mm,
it, and so I have to unleash myself for that. So
yeah.
that's where this learning has really gone for me. Like,
Mhm.
how do I show up in my business in a way that allows other women to be unleashed from that and helps
Yeah.
them feel I do a group coaching and I say that it really provides us the ABCs, which is accountability,
Mhm,
belonging, and
mhm,
connection because
mhm.
I want to provide a space that they don't feel lonely
Yeah,
and that they never feel
absolutely.
judged. stretched and that they
Mhm.
feel like they can walk out God being their business partner
Yeah.
without, criticism or whatever, at least in one space in their life. How do I show up for my daughters to just listen
Mhm.
versus trying to fix,
Yeah,
right?
uh-huh. Yep.
How do I show up for my husband um, to allow him to handle things the way he wants to handle it? Like it makes me
Mm.
insane that he doesn't go to the grocery store with a list and that we overspend groceries. But you know what? That is his stinking joy, and I
Right.
have to
Right.
I have to unleash my hold on that because
Yeah.
if I'm holding on to it too tightly, then I could turn ever so slightly and make those people in my life feel lonely
Yeah, yeah.
and never feel
Yeah.
enough and never feel like they're doing enough and all of the things that I felt. So I
Yeah.
think that's how I've brought it forward um, into everyday life as well as into my business.
Mhm. Okay. Beautiful. I love that. So, hey, you've got tons of people watching and listening, and I know you have some stuff to share with them, maybe about your book or about your group coaching, Rooted. What would you like to share with them today?
So my business is as the Hustle with Heart coach is truly teaching women to bridge faith and business to
Mhm.
make God their most powerful business partner.
Mhm.
And in doing that, they get the opportunity to feel, this grace over grind and this
Mhm.
surrender over self reliance and
Mhm.
progress over perfection and all of those things. So the way that people really can connect with me and get to know who I am before
Mhm.
they decide if they want to engage with me is
Yeah.
check out my podcast. I have a
Okay.
podcast called the Hustle with Heart podcast. It is for God centered entrepreneurs who want to
Mhm.
make God their business partner. Um, but yes,
And
if you
it's
go
a
to
great show
erinharrigan.com,
because you give tips and you give you not only give concepts, but you give practical insights into how to
yeah,
apply that. And so episodes
for
are
sure.
fairly quick,
Yeah,
fairly
they're like
short. I mean,
15, 20 minutes.
they're shorter than mine, except my
And then I have
monologues are about
interviews.
that. Yeah.
Right. Well, and then I have guest interviews. I always love to
Okay.
have once a month I have a guest interview. But if you go to erinharrigan.com, you can see the
Okay.
book that I wrote called Pursuing Success God's Way,
Mhm.
a practical guide to hustle with heart.
Mhm.
So very practical, tangible steps.
Yes.
I do have my rooted group coaching, which is
Okay.
closed right now, but it'll open again in June. But kicking off, I don't know when this is airing, but registration is open for my 7-week live course. So it takes the concepts
Okay.
of the book and
Okay.
breaks them down into a weekly class. And that class kicks off February 16th. So that registration is open right now.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, go check me out
Yeah.
and you'll know right away if you're in a place that you're like, yeah, I need more of that or not. You will know right
Right.
away.
That's right. Yeah. That's beautiful. Thank you so much. Now, Erin,
Thank
You
you.
you can't get out of this. I ask every guest this question, and you're no exception. As we wrap up and close out the show today, what is one truth that you want the people listening and watching to remember and never forget when this show ends?
You're never alone. And
Mm.
I know, like, for, what I shared today, some people who are like alone, they've been seeking the right relationship or whatever it is, they may be like, ugh, I don't need to hear. But you really, really are never alone. And I think
Right.
that's hard to grasp because God is with you,
Yeah.
but it feels like He's not tangible. But
Mhm.
He truly, truly is there. So you're
Yeah.
never fully alone, but I
Yeah.
acknowledge and I see that
Yeah.
people do really feel alone,
Yeah.
especially right now.
Well, and there's a difference between loneliness and being alone.
True,
One is
true.
a feeling, one is an actual state. Right? And so I think
Yeah.
it's acknowledging too, giving yourself permission to feel the burn of loneliness, that that's okay. It's
Yes,
legitimate to feel
it
that
is.
way. Even if you're not truly
Yeah.
alone, it's okay to feel that way from time to time, but
Yes.
use it to
Yes.
grow,
Yes.
flourish, prosper, all of that.
Yeah.
Anything
Absolutely.
else you wanted to add before we wrap up today, Erin, that I did not ask you?
No, I love that you're tackling this topic because it is a hard, hard topic. And I think
Yeah.
you've done an amazing job of having very very transparent conversations. And I know
Mhm.
that that's touching lives. So thank you for having the courage to take on this topic.
You bet. Thank you for being a part of it.
Absolutely. Anytime.
That is some vulnerable stuff right there, friends. I know you received a blessing from that, and you received some information for yourself about how it really is possible to grow from these really painful, dark, alone spaces. So, if you have been encouraged by Erin's story, by her candor, please check her out. All the links are in the show notes, but go ahead and visit her website, erinharrigan.com. And my friends, don't forget that you can join my Thriving Thoughts texting community. You get 3 texts from me per week, and you get to engage with me. And it's like having your own little personal Thriving Thoughts coach on this journey of life. All you need to do is text the word thrive, THRIVE, 2540369 Hey, friends, if you have been blessed by any episode, even if it's just one episode of this show, Thriving Thoughts, would you do me the honor? And if you're an Apple Podcast user, would you do me the honor of writing a review? I would love to have more heartfelt, honest reviews from listeners like you, because then it helps other people decide, hey, is this show for me? Or hey, is it not? I want them to know that, and I want them to know that from you, my faithful listeners. Thank you so much for supporting me and supporting the message of thriving alone. It is possible, friends. Until next time, remember to speak truth over the lies, and you will thrive in any and every circumstance.